Hello, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of historical storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Have you ever trusted something so completely that you never imagined it could fail? What does it feel like to stand inside a miracle built by human hands, believing nature itself has been defeated? When everyone around you feels safe, confident, almost arrogant, who would ever think to be afraid? And when disaster finally arrives, do you remember the moment it stopped being impossible? I remember the day I first laid eyes on her, as if it belonged to another life. She towered above the harbor, immense and flawless, her steel body reflecting the pale light of an April morning. Smoke drifted lazily from her funnels, and the sound of the dock was alive with excitement. Footsteps, voices, laughter, the creak of ropes pulled tight. People gathered simply to look at her, to witness something they believed marked the peak of human achievement. They called her Titanic, not as a name, but as a promise. I stood among the crowd with my small suitcase at my feet, staring upward, feeling impossibly small beside her. Every inch of her seemed deliberate, confident, untouchable. Newspapers had spoken of her for months. Engineers praised her design. Passengers boasted of their tickets, as if they were invitations to the future itself. She cannot sink, people said casually. Not might not. Cannot. And I believed them. When I stepped aboard, the world I knew faded behind me. The ship swallowed us gently, drawing us into warm corridors lined with polished wood and soft electric light. The air smelled of fresh paint, perfume, and something else, optimism perhaps. Everywhere I looked, there was movement and life. First-class passengers strolled with relaxed smiles, discussing dinners and destinations. Their voices echoed with certainty. In the lower decks, families settled in tightly packed cabins, hopeful and nervous, clinging to dreams of new beginnings across the ocean. Children laughed as they explored hallways that seemed endless. Titanic was not just carrying people. She was carrying futures. The days at sea passed peacefully, too peacefully. The ocean lay calm and obedient beneath us, stretching endlessly in every direction. From the deck, the water looked like glass, broken only by the steady cut of the ship's bow. The wind was cold, but it felt clean, refreshing, nothing threatening. At night, the ship glowed. Music drifted upward from the lounges. Laughter spilled into the corridors. Plates clinked in dining rooms where chandeliers cast golden reflections across crystal. Glasses. I would walk the decks and feel the reassuring vibration beneath my boots. The engines pushing us forward, mile after mile, without effort. There was no sense of danger, only progress. I remember standing by the railing one evening, watching the sun sink into the Atlantic, painting the sky with fire and shadow. Someone beside me spoke about how lucky we were to be aboard the safest ship ever built. Another joked that even God himself could not sink her. No one corrected him. By the fourth night, the cold had sharpened. The air cut deeper, biting through coats and gloves. The ocean had grown darker, heavier, as if swallowing light itself. Above us, the stars burned brighter than I had ever seen, scattered across the sky like countless silent witnesses. I stayed on deck longer than usual that night. There was something about the stillness that unsettled me, though I could not explain why. The sea was too calm, the wind too quiet. The only sounds, with a soft creak of metal and the distant murmur of voices behind me. Titanic moved forward, unchallenged. Then, without warning, the certainty cracked. There was no scream, no explosion, no violent collision, just a sensation. A gentle shudder passed through the ship, like a giant exhaling slowly. The floor beneath my feet trembled, barely noticeable, and then steadied again. Somewhere deep within the hull, metal whispered against ice. Most people did not even stop walking. A few glanced around. Someone laughed nervously. Another shrugged, already dismissing the moment as nothing more than imagination. Titanic had taught us to doubt our fears. But I felt it. The engines, once constant and reassuring, changed their rhythm. The familiar pulse weakened, slowed, and then faded into silence. That silence spread unnaturally fast, filling spaces that moments before had been alive with sound. A ship this size was never meant to be silent. I stood frozen, listening, my breath fogging the air. Around me, conversations softened, then stopped. Eyes met, smiles faded. The unspoken question passed between us like a chill. Something was wrong. We just didn't know it yet. Below us, unseen and unstoppable, the ocean had begun to enter our world. Water poured into compartments never meant to touch the sea. Doors were closed. Pumps were started. Calculations were made by men who already understood what the rest of us could not yet accept. Titanic was wounded, and as I stood there under a sky filled with stars, surrounded by people who still believed themselves safe, I had no idea that this night would erase everything I thought I knew about strength, certainty, and survival. The ship was still afloat. The lights were still on. The music had not yet stopped, but the end had already begun. At first, nothing was announced. The lights remained steady. The corridors stayed warm. Somewhere deep within the ship, music still drifted faintly through the air, as if the night itself refused to acknowledge what had happened. Titanic continued forward for a short while, carried by momentum alone, like a wounded animal unwilling to collapse in front of witnesses. People waited. That was the strange thing. We waited. I stood near the railing, watching crew members move more quickly than before, their boots striking the deck with purpose. Their faces were controlled, but their eyes betrayed urgency. They spoke in low voices, clipped and precise, the way men do when they're trying not to alarm those around them. A steward passed me and offered a polite smile, though it felt rehearsed. He said there was nothing to worry about, that the ship had merely brushed against ice. His words were calm, but his pace was not. The silence from the engines grew heavier by the minute. In the corridors, people began to notice small changes. Cups left on tables trembled faintly. A few doors creaked open on their own. The ship felt different. Not violent. Not yet. Just subtly unbalanced, like a floor that was no longer perfectly level. I walked below deck, driven by a curiosity I could not explain. The air felt colder the deeper I went. Somewhere ahead, I heard voices raised in confusion, followed by the unmistakable sound of water. That was when I saw it. A thin stream at first, spilling across the floor like a living thing, reflecting the yellow glow of electric lights. Water seeped through seams that were never meant to open. It moved quietly, patiently, unconcerned with human schedules or reassurances. People gathered, staring. Some laughed nervously. Others frowned, unsure what to make of it. A man knelt and touched the water, then stood abruptly, his expression changing when he felt the cold bite his skin. Stewards arrived quickly, ushering people away, closing doors, repeating the same practice phrases. Please return to your cabins. Everything is under control. But control was slipping. Above us, the ship began to tilt, so slightly that many did not notice at first. A glass rolled across a table. A chair shifted on its own. These were small things, easy to ignore, yet impossible to forget once noticed. The first true sign of fear appeared not as screams, but as silence. Conversation stopped. Mid-sentence, people began to listen instead of speak. They felt the floor beneath their feet, testing it with cautious steps. Confidence faded from faces that hours earlier had been filled with. Pride. I returned to the open deck. The cold had intensified, sharp enough to sting. Breath hung thick in the air. The ocean lay dark and endless around us, indifferent to the drama unfolding above. Crew members were now uncovering lifeboats, their movements efficient, almost mechanical. That was when the truth reached us, not through words, but through actions. You do not prepare lifeboats, unless something is terribly wrong. Murmurs spread across the deck. People asked questions quietly at first, then more urgently. Parents pulled children closer. Couples stood hand in hand, no longer laughing, no longer pretending. An officer's voice finally cut through the growing tension, instructing passengers to put on life jackets, and remain calm. The word precaution was repeated, often, as if saying it enough times might make it true. I put on my life jacket with trembling hands. Around me, some still resisted the idea that danger was real. They smiled tightly, joked about drills, complained about the cold. The ship was still upright. The lights were still on. Surely this was all unnecessary. But beneath us, the water continued its slow advance. Compartment by compartment, Titanic was losing a battle no one could see. Men with knowledge and calculations already understood the truth. The ship was designed to survive damage, but not this much. Not this deep, not this far forward. The realization spread quietly among the crew, then to the officers, and finally, inevitably, to the passengers. Hope did not vanish all at once. It fractured. I remember the moment I truly understood. I felt it in my body before my mind accepted it. A deeper tilt, unmistakable now. Standing required effort. The deck no longer met my feet evenly. The ship, once so proud and level, had begun to bow to the ocean. The unsinkable ship was sinking. Around me, the sounds changed. Calm voices gave way to raised ones. Orders became sharper. Somewhere, someone cried out, not in panic yet, but in disbelief. Lifeboats were being prepared in earnest now, ropes creaking as they were swung outward. The night grew colder. Stars burned overhead, uncaring. The ocean waited below, silent and vast. Titanic was no longer a miracle. She was a wounded giant, bleeding invisibly beneath the surface. And as people gathered on deck, wrapped in coats and uncertainty, the truth finally settled over us like frost. Not everyone would leave this ship alive. Why did the warnings come again and again, yet changed nothing? Why did we slow down too late, when the sea had already made its decision? Why did so many of us feel uneasy that night, but still went to sleep? And why, even now, does that calm moment before disaster feel more terrifying than the disaster itself? I remember the night clearly. April 14th, 1912. The ocean was unusually calm. Too calm. No waves broke against the hull. No wind whispered through the decks. The sea looked like dark glass, reflecting the stars so perfectly that horizon and sky seemed to merge into one endless void. People said it was beautiful. I felt it was wrong. By then, we had already received multiple ice warnings. Messages crackled through the wireless room throughout the day. Ships ahead reporting massive ice fields, drifting bergs, walls of frozen white lurking in the darkness. Each warning was logged. Each was acknowledged. And yet, we continued almost at full speed. Why? Because this ship was not built to fear the ocean. It was built to conquer it. At dinner that evening, laughter echoed through the first-class dining saloon. Crystal glasses clinked. Music floated gently from the orchestra. Women wore silk and diamonds. Men spoke of business, wealth, futures that now feel painfully unreal. In second class, families shared stories, children played, dreams of America danced in their voices. In third class, hope was everywhere, thick, raw, desperate hope, the kind that makes people believe suffering has finally ended. No one fell in danger. Even among the crew, confidence ruled. The Titanic had watertight compartments, reinforced bulkheads, technology no other ship possessed. Even if she hits ice, someone said, she'll float. I wanted to believe that. Around 9 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. You could feel on your skin. Breath turned faintly visible. The sea remained unnaturally smooth, a dangerous condition, though few realized it. Without waves breaking against ice, even large bergs became nearly invisible in the dark. Up in the crow's nest, the lookouts strained their eyes. No binoculars, just the naked human gaze against the endless night. Below, the wireless operators were overwhelmed with passenger messages. Ice warnings from other ships were delayed, interrupted, brushed aside. Not out of negligence, but because no one believed disaster was truly possible. At 10 p.m., the ship pressed on. At 11 p.m., some passengers went to bed, lulled by the steady hum of engines and the illusion of safety. I stood on deck for a moment, staring into the black water. The stars seemed too close. The silence felt heavy, like the pause before a scream. Then, at 11:40 p.m., the ocean finally spoke. A sudden shudder ran through the ship. Not violent, not dramatic. Just a strange vibration beneath our feet, like a giant finger dragging slowly along steel. Many barely noticed. Some thought it was nothing. Others felt curiosity, rather. Then fear. The engine slowed. A few passengers leaned over the railings, trying to see what had happened. They saw ice, a towering, ghostly mass sliding past us in silence. Inside the ship, below the waterline, the truth was already unfolding. Ice had sliced the hull open in multiple places. Not a single wound, but a series of fatal cuts. Water poured in relentlessly, flooding compartment after compartment. The ship that was said to be unsinkable had only hours to live. But most of us didn't know that yet. Crew members inspected damage quietly. Orders were given. Calmly. Too calmly. The idea of panic felt absurd. The Titanic was still upright. Still warm. Still lit like a floating palace. Some passengers were told to put on life jackets, just as a precaution. They laughed. Why would we need them? Why leave warmth for cold? Why abandon certainty for fear? I remember the orchestra beginning to play. Soft music drifted through the corridors, an attempt to soothe nerves that didn't yet know they should be afraid. I remember couples refusing to separate, mothers calming children, men insisting everything was fine. And I remember the water, creeping, silent, unstoppable, rising in places no one could see. This was the most dangerous moment of all. Not the collision, not the sinking, but the delay between truth and belief. Because the Titanic was dying, and almost no one truly understood it yet. What did we truly realize the ship was dying? Was it the rising water, the silent corridors, or the look in the officer's eyes? Why were we told to remain calm, even as time slipped away? And how does fear change when it no longer screams, but whispers? At first, nothing seemed urgent. The lights were still on. The floors were still dry in most places. The air was warm, filled with music and polite conversation. But beneath us, the sea was already winning. I remember seeing crew members move faster now, no longer strolling, but not yet running. Their faces were controlled, professional, yet something had changed. They avoided eye contact. They spoke in short sentences. They listened more than they talked. Then the order came. Prepare the lifeboats. It sounded almost ceremonial, as if this were a drill rehearsed many times before. Women and children were asked to put on life jackets. Stewards knocked on doors gently, apologetically, as though waking someone for breakfast. Some passengers resisted. Why, they asked. Is something wrong? Surely this is unnecessary. No one wanted to say the words out loud. The truth was brutal. The ship had been designed to survive flooding in 4 compartments. 6 were already breached. The water was spilling over bulkheads that were never meant to be overtaken. The Titanic was sinking. Slowly, invisibly, irreversibly. Captain Smith stood silent for a long time, staring at the damage reports. I will never forget his face, not panic, not anger, but disbelief. As if the world had betrayed him. The engineers worked below deck, knee-deep in freezing water, keeping the lights on, the pumps running, knowing full well it would cost them their lives. They did not flee. They did not complain. They stayed. On deck, the first lifeboats were uncovered. That's when confusion turned into fear. There were too few boats. Everyone could see it now, even without counting. It was obvious. This ship carried over 2,000 souls, and the boats could barely hold half. Why weren't there more? Because the ship was unsinkable. Because regulations were outdated. Because confidence had replaced caution. And now, confidence had become a death sentence. The first lifeboat was lowered, not even half full. People hesitated. The ship still felt safer than the black ocean below. The water looked endless cold, alive in a way the ship no longer did. Some women refused to leave their husbands. Some men stepped back, insisting others go first. Some laughed nervously, waving goodbye, certain they would reunite soon. They wouldn't. As more boats were launched, the angle of the deck became noticeable. Plates slid, chairs shifted, water began creeping into public rooms, quiet and relentless. The orchestra kept playing, not loudly, not heroically, just enough to hold the night together. I passed by the grand staircase and saw water touching the bottom steps, a sight so unreal it felt staged, like a cruel performance. Chandeliers still glowed above it, reflecting light on the rising flood. Time felt distorted. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours collapsed into moments. People began asking harder questions now. Questions no one wanted to answer. Are there enough boats? When will help arrive? Are we going to die? No one said yes. No one said no. The truth hung between us, heavy and unspoken. And then something shifted. The calm began to crack. Orders became sharper. Voices rose. Fear spread not like fire, but like cold, numbing, paralyzing, unavoidable. I realized then that the most terrifying part of this disaster was not the water. It was the waiting. Waiting for your turn. Waiting for a decision. Waiting to understand whether you were meant to live or vanish into the dark. The Titanic was no longer a ship. It had become a question, and in the next moments, each of us would be forced to answer it, with courage, with denial, or with silence. The order of the night collapsed quietly at first. There was no single moment when chaos erupted. It seeped in the same way the water did, slowly, relentlessly, one decision at a time. The deck tilted a little more now, just enough to feel it in the calves, just enough to make walking uncomfortable. People compensated without realizing it, leaning forward slightly, as if the ship itself were urging us onward. Lifeboats continued to lower into the dark. Each one that left took something with it. Hope, time, certainty. I stood among a growing crowd near the rail, watching silhouettes descend into the Black Sea. The sound of ropes creaking echoed unnaturally loud against the silence of the night. Somewhere below, water slapped against steel, indifferent to the lives above it. Stewards shouted instructions that no longer carried authority. Their voices were swallowed by the wind, by confusion, by the growing realization that there was no longer a plan that could save everyone. People began to move differently now. They no longer waited politely. They watched the boats with calculating eyes. They measured distances. They assessed chances. I saw a woman clutching her child so tightly the boy began to cry, not from fear but from pain. A man tried to pry her fingers, loose, insisting they were next. Another man intervened. Words turned sharp. Someone shoved. It was the first time I saw fear win. Not panic. Fear is quieter than that. Fear convinces you that survival is urgent, personal, and justified. Officers drew their revolvers, not to threaten, but to remind. Women and children first. They repeated, as if repetition alone could restore order. Some men obeyed without hesitation, stepping back, hands raised slightly, accepting what they believed was fate. Others lingered near the edges, hoping rules might bend when no one was looking. They rarely did. I watched one lifeboat lowered nearly full, its passengers silent, faces pale, eyes fixed on the ship above them. They did not wave. They did not cry out. They knew. Below decks, the situation was far worse. Water rushed through corridors that had once smelled of perfume and cigars. It climbed staircases, swallowing carpets, furniture, memories. The ship groaned, not loudly, but deeply, like something wounded and tired. I passed through second-class areas where families were still being gathered, still being guided upward too late. Doors jammed, passageways narrowed. Every turn seemed to lead to another obstacle, another delay. Time was running out, and the ship made sure we felt every second of it. The orchestra continued to play, though their music had changed. No longer light, no longer cheerful. The notes stretched, heavy with resignation. It wasn't bravery that kept them playing. It was understanding. On deck, the cold grew sharper. Breath fogged the air. Frost formed on railings. The sea below was no longer just dark. It was alive, shifting, waiting. I looked at the lifeboats, still hanging, and then at the people still standing. There were too many of us left. The ship dipped again. Plates slid violently now. A loud crash echoed as something broke loose below. Screams followed, short, shocked, uncontrollable. This was the moment denial died. People ran, not in one direction, in all directions. Toward boats, toward officers, toward nowhere. The rules shattered under the weight of desperation. I saw a man jump into a lifeboat as it was being lowered, only to be forced out at gunpoint. I saw another cling to the ropes until his hands slipped, vanishing into the sea without a sound. The ocean did not roar. It accepted. The Titanic was no longer sinking slowly. The angle was obvious now. Walking felt like climbing. The bow disappeared further into the water, dragging the rest of the ship down with it. Lights still burned, a cruel kindness. I realized then that survival had become a matter of position, timing, and luck. Not wealth, not virtue, not strength. Luck and luck. That night was running out. As the last lifeboats were prepared, the crowd pressed closer. Officers shouted until their voices cracked. Shots rang out into the air, warnings, not executions, but they changed everything. Fear finally screamed. The ship shuddered violently, and a sound like thunder rolled through its spine. Somewhere deep inside, steel surrendered. I grabbed the rail to steady myself. The night had broken apart, and with it, the illusion that anyone was in control. Why did the warnings come again and again, yet change nothing? Why did we slow down too late, when the sea had already made its decision? Why did so many of us feel uneasy that night, but still went to sleep? And why, even now, does that calm moment before disaster feel more terrifying than the disaster itself? I remember the night clearly. April 14th, 1912. The ocean was unusually calm, too calm. No waves broke against the hull. No wind whispered through the decks. The sea looked like dark glass, reflecting the stars so perfectly that horizon and sky seemed to merge into one endless void. People said it was beautiful. I felt it was wrong. By then, we had already received multiple ice warnings. Messages crackled through the wireless room throughout the day. Ships ahead reporting massive ice fields, drifting bergs, walls of frozen white lurking in the darkness. Each warning was logged. Each was acknowledged. And yet, we continued almost at full speed. Why? Because this ship was not built to fear the ocean. It was built to conquer it. At dinner that evening, laughter echoed through the first-class dining saloon. Crystal glasses clinked. Music floated gently from the orchestra. Women wore silk and diamonds. Men spoke of business, wealth, futures that now feel painfully unreal. In second class, families shared stories. Children played. Dreams of America danced in their voices. In third class, hope was everywhere, thick, raw, desperate hope, the kind that makes people believe suffering has finally ended. No one felt in danger. Even among the crew, confidence ruled. The Titanic had watertight compartments, reinforced bulkheads, technology no other ship possessed. Even if she hits ice, someone said, she'll float. I wanted to believe that. Around 9 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. You could feel it on your skin. Breath turned faintly visible. The sea remained unnaturally smooth, a dangerous condition, though few realized it. Without waves breaking against ice. Even large birds became nearly invisible in the dark. Up in the crow's nest, the lookouts strained their eyes. No binoculars, just a naked human gaze against the endless night. Below, the wireless operators were overwhelmed with passenger messages. Ice warnings from other ships were delayed, interrupted, brushed aside. Not out of negligence, but because no one believed disaster was truly possible. At 10 p.m., the ship pressed on. At 11 p.m., some passengers went to bed, lulled by the steady hum of engines and the illusion of safety. I stood on deck for a moment, staring into the black water. The stars seemed too close. The silence felt heavy, like the pause before a scream. Then, at 11:40 p.m., the ocean finally spoke. A sudden shudder ran through the ship. Not violent, not dramatic, just a strange vibration beneath our feet, like a giant finger dragging slowly along steel. Many barely noticed. Some thought it was nothing. Others felt curiosity, rather. Then fear. The engine slowed. A few passengers leaned over the railings, trying to see what had happened. They saw ice, a towering, ghostly mass sliding past us in silence. Inside the ship, below the waterline, the truth was already unfolding. Ice had sliced the hull open in multiple places, not a single wound, but a series of fatal cuts. Water poured in relentlessly, flooding compartment after compartment. The ship that was said to be unsinkable had only hours to live. But most of us didn't know that yet. Crew members inspected damage quietly. Orders were given. Calmly. Too calmly. The idea of panic felt absurd. The Titanic was still upright. Still warm. Still lit like a floating palace. Some passengers were told to put on life jackets, just as a precaution. They laughed. Why would we need them? Why leave warmth for cold? Why abandon certainty for fear? I remember the orchestra beginning to play. Soft music drifted through the corridors, an attempt to soothe nerves that didn't yet know they should be afraid. I remember couples refusing to separate, mothers calming children, men insisting everything was fine. And I remember the water, creeping, silent, unstoppable, rising in places no one could see. This was the most dangerous moment of all. Not the collision, not the sinking, but the delay between truth and belief. Because the Titanic was dying, and almost no one truly understood it yet. The water did not feel cold at first. It felt violent. Every nerve screamed at once, as if my body had been shattered into fragments. My chest locked tight, refusing air, refusing rhythm. Panic surged not from fear, but from biology, the body rebelling against the impossible. I fought to breathe. Each gasp burned, sharp and shallow, tearing at my throat. The sea forced its way into my mouth, salty and merciless. I coughed, thrashed, flailed, not with purpose, but with desperation. Around me, the night was alive. Screams cut through the darkness, short and raw, then vanished one by one. Some voices called names. Some prayed. Some made no sound at all. The ship was gone. There was no shelter now, no authority, no order. Only water, darkness, and time. And time was no longer generous. I kicked until my legs began to numb, until movement felt delayed, as if command were traveling through ice before reaching my muscles. I reached out, blindly, and struck something solid, a piece of wreckage, rough and splintered. I clung to it. Others did the same. Hands collided. Fingers scraped. Someone tried to pull themselves up where there was no space. A body pressed against mine, trembling violently, then went still. I pushed away, not out of cruelty, but survival. The cold was thinking for us now. It crept inward, methodical, stealing strength in stages. First fingers, then toes, then limbs. My hands lost feeling entirely, gripping only by memory of pressure rather than sensation. The sea was crowded with shapes, bodies, debris, overturned boats just beyond reach. The stars reflected on the surface, mocking in their beauty, indifferent to the suffering below. Minutes stretched endlessly. The screaming softened, not because people were calm, but because they were exhausted. Voices grew hoarse. Movements slowed, one by one. Figures slipped beneath the surface without struggle, as if finally accepting rest. I understood then that death here was not dramatic. It was quiet. The cold did not rush. It waited. It convinced the body to surrender gently, persuading muscles to stop fighting, persuading the mind that stillness was relief. My thoughts drifted. Memories surfaced without warning. Warmth, light, laughter, rooms filled with sound. They felt unreal, like scenes from another life, belonging to someone else entirely. I forced myself to stay awake. I focused on pain, the ache in my chest, the burning in my lungs, because pain meant awareness. Awareness meant time. Time meant a chance, however thin. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a sound that did not belong to the sea. A whistle, sharp, repeated. Hope stirred weakly, cautiously, afraid of disappointment. A lifeboat. It moved slowly, hesitating among the debris. Those aboard called out, their voices trembling, torn between duty and terror. They feared being swamped, feared the grasping hands of the dying. I called out. My voice barely existed. A broken sound carried weakly across the water. I waved one arm, though I cannot feel it. Each movement felt delayed, distant, as if my body belonged to someone else. The boat came closer. Faces appeared above me, pale, haunted, alive. Hands reached down. I was pulled upward, my body useless, dead weight. Arms dragged me over the edge, and I collapsed into the bottom of the boat, coughing violently, retching water and air in equal measure. I was alive. Around me, others were not. The boat drifted among the silent now, collecting those who still moved, those who still breathed. There were not many. The sea had already decided. As we rowed away from the place where the Titanic had vanished, the sound behind us faded entirely. What remained was silence, vast, heavy, absolute. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering uncontrollably, teeth chattering, body still fighting the cold that lingered inside my bones. I looked back. There was nothing to see. No ship, no lights, no monument to the tragedy. Only empty water under an endless sky. And in that emptiness, I understood something I would carry for the rest of my life. Survival was not victory. It was responsibility. Dawn did not arrive gently. It crept in slowly, almost apologetically, as if the sun itself hesitated to reveal what the night had done. The darkness thinned, and with it, illusion faded. Shapes emerged from the water, lifeboats scattered like debris, faces pale and hollow, eyes staring at nothing. The sea was calm, too calm. It moved softly now, rocking the boat beneath me, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, as if thousands of lives had not been erased only hours before. That calmness felt crueler than the storm ever could have been. I sat among the survivors, wrapped in borrowed coats, bodies pressed together for warmth. No one spoke. Voices felt inappropriate here, as if sound itself might disturb the dead. Around us floated reminders of the night. Chairs, broken wood, fragments of a ship that had once carried dreams across the ocean. There were bodies, too, motionless, preserved by the cold, faces strangely peaceful. I forced myself not to look for long. Somewhere in the distance, a plume of smoke appeared against the pale sky. At first, I thought it was another illusion, hope playing tricks on exhausted eyes. Then it grew closer. The Carpathia. Relief did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, painfully. Some wept when they saw her. Others simply stared, unable to react, unsure whether salvation was real or just another promise the sea would steal away. As the rescue ship approached, the weight of survival settled fully upon us. Ropes were lowered. Ladders followed. Hands reached down, firm and steady, pulling us from our fragile boats into a world that suddenly felt foreign. I climbed weakly, my legs shaking, my body still numb and uncooperative. On deck, the warmth struck me like shock. Blankets, hot drinks, gentle voices asking names, asking numbers, asking questions I struggled to answer. Some survivors collapsed immediately. Others wandered aimlessly, searching for familiar faces that would never appear. I searched too, not desperately, quietly. I looked for the people I had spoken. Till hours earlier, the ones I had stood beside, the strangers who had shared that final night aboard the Titanic. They were gone. No announcement was needed. Absence said everything. The Carpathia turned slowly away from the sight. As we moved on, the sea closed behind us, erasing the last visible trace of disaster. No marker remained. No grave. Just open water where a city of steel had vanished. That thought haunted me. How easily the world could lose something so large. How quickly certainty could dissolve. Inside the ship, survivors were gathered, listed, counted. Names were called. Some answered. Most did not. Each silence cut deeper than any scream from the night before. I wrapped myself tighter in my blanket and stared at the floor, listening to the ships. Engines Steady, reassuring, alive. That sound, once ordinary, now felt miraculous. I was alive, yet I felt strangely hollow, as if part of me had remained behind in the water with those who never left it. The night was over, but its weight had not lifted. It had simply followed us into the light. The days that followed felt unreal, as if time itself had lost its shape. Aboard the Carpathia, life continued in fragments. Meals were served, orders were given, beds hung, yet everything sounded distant, muffled, as though the world were wrapped in thick cloth. We moved among one another, quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance holding us together. Survivors avoided mirrors, not out of vanity, but fear of recognizing ourselves as people who had lived while so many had not. When I finally saw my reflection, I barely recognized the face staring back. Older, hollow, marked by a night that refused to stay in the past. Lists were posted, names written in neat columns, cruel in their simplicity. Alive, missing, presumed lost. People gathered around them in silence, scanning for familiar letters, familiar shapes. Some found relief. Others collapsed where they stood. I watched a woman trace the same name over and over with her finger, as if repetition might summon the person back into existence. It didn't. News traveled fast once we reached land. Headlines spread across cities and continents. The unsinkable ship, the tragedy, the numbers, always the numbers. They grew larger with every telling, yet still felt too small to capture what had been lost. The world mourned, but not in the way we did. For those who had not been there, the disaster became a story, a warning, a lesson. For us, it was memory, sharp, persistent, impossible to set down. Questions came quickly, from reporters, from officials, from strangers who wanted to understand how such a thing could happen. They asked about the ice, the speed, the boats, the decisions. They wanted explanations tidy enough to fit on paper. We struggled to answer. How do you explain panic without drama? How do you describe silence that weighs more than sound? How do you put into words the moment you realize survival has nothing to do with deserving? Some survivors spoke endlessly, replaying the night in precise detail, as if repetition might drain it of power. Others refused to speak at all, sealing their memories away behind carefully controlled expressions. I found myself somewhere in between. At night, sleep came in pieces. I would wake suddenly, heart racing, convinced the floor beneath me was tilting, convinced water was climbing toward my chest. Even when daylight returned, the cold lingered inside me. I carried it everywhere. Survivor's guilt settled quietly like dust. It whispered questions without answers. Why me? Why this boat? Why this moment? Each question led nowhere, yet refused to disappear. I learned that survival is not a gift freely given. It is a burden carried forward. The inquiries began soon after. Hearings, testimonies, diagrams drawn and redrawn. Men in authority debated responsibility. Regulation, blame. Changes were promised. Laws rewritten. Safety redefined. All of it mattered. Yet none of it could return the dead. As weeks passed, life slowly demanded our participation again. Letters were written. Homes were returned to. Ordinary days resumed their rhythm. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. I listened differently. I noticed silence. I respected the sea. The Titanic became a symbol of ambition, of hubris, of human confidence stretched too far. But to me, she remained something simpler and more painful. She was faces, voices, hands slipping away in the dark. History would remember the ship. I remembered the people. And I knew that whatever came next, whatever ending this story demanded, it would not be about steel or ice or fate. It would be about what we chose to carry forward.